Welcome back. Right now we're going to be talking about different types of triangles. Now, there are 4 types of different triangles to work with, which is a little confusing because you only see 3 of them here. The one that is missing is a right triangle. And right triangles are so important that they have their own branch of mathematics called trigonometry. So it's not that I'm neglecting them here, I just want to focus on these 3 for the time being. Okay, first type that we're going to look at is something called an equilateral. Equilateral triangles are triangles that have all sides and all angles congruent. So we're going to mark these sides as all having the same length. And we also said that they're going to have all angles congruent. Now, even more about these equilateral triangles is this. There are 180 degrees in a triangle, and there are 3 equal angles. So if we were to divide 180 by 3, we would find out that each of these angles are worth 60 degrees. So we can be that specific. Okay, all congruent sides and all angles 60 degrees. Okay, so good to know about equilateral. Isosceles triangles are triangles that have 2 congruent sides that we call legs, which would leave this bottom side as the base, and we also have congruent base angles. Now this is nice because if we notice on a triangle that we have congruent sides, we automatically get the base angles congruent, and vice versa. If we notice that we have 2 congruent base angles, we automatically get our legs to be congruent. Okay, 2 congruent legs, 2 congruent base angles. And finally is scalene. Scalene, there's nothing congruent about them. In fact, they're really not the most interesting type of triangles to talk about. However, the same principles and theorems work with scalene as they have in the past. I'm talking about the triangle sum theorem will still work in here. The triangle inequality will still work for the scalene. However, there's nothing about their sides or angles being congruent that will really help us. So for the most part, these are not the most useful of triangles. Let's take a look at some problems. You're going to see a lot of problems that say solve for x, solve for y, or even solve the triangle. Okay? Now, what we need to do is we need to consider what type of triangle we're working with. And that could have a lot to do with the angle measures inside of the triangle. So, looking at this first problem, I notice that I have on the inside 80 degrees, 2x, and 2x. Well, if these two are equal to each other, that means they're congruent. So let's just mark that real quick. We haven't done any actual work. We're just making some observations. If I have congruent base angles, that means that I have congruent legs. That's useful because I notice that I have my y on the outside, and I have a 9 on the outside, and I have this 12. So before, it was a toss-up between which one of these I wanted to use. Now that I know that I have congruent legs, I know that I want to use these two. So let's work on solving for x first. Well, these are interior angles. Well, I know that if I add all of those interior angles together, they're going to add up to 180. And if I combine like terms and subtract away the 80, I end up with 4x equaling 100. Divide by 4 on both sides. That gives me x equaling 25. And then looking at the y's, because we've already marked our picture, I know that 3y is equal to 9. And if I divide by 3 on both sides, that's going to give me the value of 3 that I was looking for. Let's take a look at a different problem. Alright, here I notice that I have a triangle with 60 degrees, 60 degrees, 10x degrees, and then on the outside I have 5y, 15 in this mystery side. Now, I should be able to look and notice, oh, 60, 60, hey, this looks a lot like an equilateral triangle. In fact, that's the only value that could possibly fit here. So, because of that, I know that I have all congruent sides and all congruent angles. That's going to make it easier to solve for x, because I know that 10x has to be 60 degrees. Quickly divide by 10 on both sides. That's going to give me a value of 6 for x. And also, we marked off the sides being congruent. So we know that 5y is going to equal 15. And if I divide by 5 on both sides, that gives me y equaling 3. Try doing these two on your own. Okay, take a second to pause the video, try them on your own, and then come back and we'll discuss both of them. Alright, let's see how you did. Hopefully you notice that you have isosceles triangles, because we have congruent legs, congruent legs, congruent legs, right? And we have a 60-degree angle here, which means if this is our base angle of 60, that makes this angle congruent. That makes it also 60 degrees. Hey, wait a minute, I'm starting to notice that now I have equilateral. That makes this 60 degrees also. Hey, wait a second, I'm starting to notice a lot of things going on. These side lengths are all equal, which is going to make all of these things equal. I'm going to end up with 60s all around, which is good because it tells me that I have equilateral triangles all around. And hey, wait a minute, all my values are on the outside. And I know that if all these lengths are all the same, then that means that this thing up here has to be 20, and this thing down here has to be 20. That's going to help. 5x is 20, divide by 5. That gives me x equals 4. Here I see that 10y is going to be 20, because all sides end up being congruent. That gives me y equals 2. And on this next problem, well, I have to use a little bit of some older information here. I'm noticing that I have a straight line and a 100-degree angle here. And I know that a straight line has 180 degrees in it. So if I subtract away the 100 that they gave me, I'm going to end up with this angle right here as being 80 degrees. Now why that's useful? Because again, I should notice that I have an isosceles triangle, which means that the base angles are congruent. So if this angle and this angle are congruent, and this one's worth 80, guess what? X is worth 80. Okay, well how about y? Well, again, I should notice I have an isosceles triangle. That makes these two angles at the bottom congruent. Well, I don't know what this one is. I do know that this is y, so this has to also be y degrees. Well, let's just add these things together. Y plus 100 has to add to 180. That means 2y plus 100 equals 180. Subtract 100. That gives me 2y equals 80. Quickly divide by 2. That gives me y equaling 40 degrees. So how'd you do on these last few problems on your own? Hopefully you were able to identify a couple of these quick properties, such as equilaterals, all having 60s and all having congruent sides. And over here, hopefully you recognize that you have congruent base angles because we have isosceles triangles. And this little bit right here with the supplementary angles, don't forget it, because this stuff is not going to go away. It's useful throughout the whole year. Alright, until next time.